Very good. We'll start our third session now. I'm not sure if it is titled quite the right way. It's currently called Cryptocurrencies in the Future, but what we really had in mind was to have a discussion on some of the emerging ideas around digital currencies or global stable coins, if you like, private or public. It's a very important and evolving theme in global discussions, both amongst central banks and financial regulators and amongst private sector participants. And I think we're not yet in a position where we know what the optimal solutions are. And I say solutions with a plural rather than in the singular. But we have with us three speakers who are each looking at this very closely. David Marcus, of course, is head of Calibra and has been one of the people who's been exploring and advancing the ideas behind Libra. Agustin Carstens, of course, well known to everyone here, currently as General Manager of the BIS, but with an exceptional record in public office in Mexico. And Darrell Duffie, who's a well-known academic, finance and economics at Stanford. Des, I'm not sure if it's your day job or your night job, but you're looking at digital currencies very closely as well. I think what we'll do is we'll start with David Marcus, we'll then move on to Darrell, and we'll come to Agustin. David.
Thank you, Tharman. Thank you to the Group of 30 for inviting me to this event. It's truly an honor to speak with this audience and share our progress with Libra more openly. First, I'd like to spend a bit of time highlighting the motivation behind Libra. This is something that has become extremely personal to me over the years. And we've seen that the internet has changed the world in such a profound way and has democratized access to free unlimited communications, the world's knowledge, and facilitated a more competitive market, resulting in lower prices and lower barriers of access for billions of people around the world armed with a $30 smartphone. The same isn't true today in the financial world. What is more, while pre-internet communications were expensive, they were at least priced the same way for everyone. The current system penalizes those who can afford it the least, and while there has been great innovation and progress on the edges of our current financial system, its core has not seen much progress in over 50 years. The result? 1.7 billion people are still unbanked, while 1 billion of them have mobile phones. Cross-border payments, a $700 billion annual market, still costs 7% on average, and costs have stopped coming down. There is no global protocol for a payment tool allowing for interoperability for wallets and banks. It's a bit as if you still couldn't exchange emails between Gmail and Yahoo Mail. Small business owners are stuck with their local or national markets in many cases and can't access the global economy as easily and cost effectively as they should. It's about time for a change. Second, I want to reiterate our strong commitment to complying with applicable regulatory requirements before the Libra blockchain goes live. We recognize that a change of this magnitude can't be operated without a great sense of responsibility. We don't shy away from regulation. We seek to comply with it and embrace it. This week, the G7 Working Group's report on global stablecoins highlights a framework within which we believe Libra can operate. A new global protocol for payments must be designed and operated in such a way that it not only augments good monetary policy, but also advances the efficacy of current standards for consumer protection, AML, CFT, and criminal activity detection. This is our commitment as we build this network, and we're hard at work to ensure our actions and our work reflects this commitment. As an example, we're fully supportive of a licensing regime that would prevent the Libra Association from changing the backing of the reserve into a fractional reserve system. We're also working with the Libra Association and their other members to design controls throughout the Libra network so that we are able to appropriately address AML sanctions requirements and build a safe ecosystem. A proposal is currently being discussed with key association stakeholders that would address compliance across the whole ecosystem. Third, it's also been very clear to us from the very beginning that a payment network such as the Libra network shouldn't be controlled by one company. We welcome competition to benefit local access and strive for the lowest costs possible for consumers. This is why, despite Facebook's large investment into the development of the required technology to launch such a network, all the code is now open sourced. This is also why Facebook has relinquished its control, and now, since the beginning of this week, is only one equal voice alongside 20 other initial members of the Libra Association, and in the future, many more to come. Fourth, privacy is essential when it comes to money and transactions. This is why Facebook created Calibra Inc. as a separate subsidiary to ensure full separation of financial and social data, something people have told us loud and clear that they wanted. Fifth, we really believe in the opportunity of a broader public-private partnership to make Libra even more successful and trusted. There's a spectrum of engagement available for us to work together. We also understand that the appetite of the public sector might evolve over time, and it's our desire to ensure we can accommodate this as Libra gains traction, as we answer legitimate concerns that have been raised. Sixth, last but not least, I'd like to stress with this esteemed audience that the status quo is not an option any longer. Multiple digital currency projects are being actively worked on as I deliver this speech. Some will launch this year, some next. The train is leaving the station. Together, we can make sure the right kind of train arrives at the destination. One where people all around the world have much broader access to digital money and financial services. One that lowers costs for moving money around the world for everyone. One that enables more trade across borders, and one that doesn't sacrifice security, privacy, and our ideals in the process. So please join us on this journey. We can work together towards a better future for the people we all have a responsibility to serve better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Darrell?
Thank you, Tharman. It's a great opportunity. This is very timely. As we heard on the first panel this morning, the time is ripe to upgrade our payment system, and there are a lot of opportunities that are not being met currently. And I agree with the key points, actually, all of the key points that David has just brought up, namely that there's a vacuum that needs to be filled with a better payment system, and also that the use case for Libra and other digital currency entrants, for example, through stablecoins, is well established, and that it's feasible to do exactly what he described. And yet, at the end of my remarks, I'm going to recommend a different solution. So just briefly to set this up, operationally, what Libra and other digital currency stablecoin entrants are promoting is the idea that when Alice goes to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread, she will hand over a token. Currently, it's paper money, and in the future, it could be a stablecoin. The alternative, which is the legacy system that we have, is to make a payment. Alice will instruct her bank by one means or another to transfer out of her bank account and into Bob the baker's bank account the $8 for the loaf of bread. $8 because I live in Palo Alto. Banks still form the backbone of our payment system, and today I'm going to focus on general purpose payments as opposed to the wholesale settlement of wholesale transactions, which for which there are other technologies involving stablecoins that I'm not going to discuss. So this is a natural arrangement that we have today. The bank account-based payment system provides natural gatekeeping for anti-money laundering, although there have been some significant lapses in that respect. It provides a channel for the implementation of monetary policy, and in particular, it provides for an elastic supply of money, which is critical, something that stablecoin approach depicted in this diagram does not do. So this is illustrates the creation by Alice of 500 stablecoin units or tokens, by which some issuer provides her with those stablecoins. Her funds to buy those stablecoins are transferred to a trust, such as the Libra trust, which then invests in safe assets, such as bank deposits. Now, as I mentioned, I think this is perfectly feasible, and that it can be done in a safe manner that will protect Alice from loss of her investment, that will keep the price of her tokens stable with respect to whatever that basket is. It could be a single currency or a basket of currencies, and that Alice will be able to effectively buy her loaf of bread or pay her monthly rent or whatever using those stable coins. So why is it that I don't think that this approach will end up being the one that most of you in the room that are responsible in the central banking community for upgrading our payment system? Let me explain why I think you will choose instead to upgrade your current bank account-based payment systems. This is already in progress, beginning with Korea, the Bank of Mexico, in Sweden, United Kingdom, and Singapore, in the European Central Bank environment, and as proposed in the United States, whether through the private sector or through the public sector, upgrading the bank account-based payment system is, in my view, a more natural approach. Not to say that it's easy. It involves a significant amount of operational challenges. The alternative for central banks, going back to the stablecoin situation, is to provide a central bank digital currency. Governor Lael Brainerd of the US Federal Reserve System gave an excellent speech this week explaining why the introduction of a central bank digital currency is quite problematic. It introduces a tremendous operational challenge. The central bank essentially displaces banks in facing the general public, corporate and consumers, becoming responsible for both providing the currency and the currency arrangements, but also for monitoring private transactions to ensure that only legal transactions are being made. And that's an enormous disruption to the current payment arrangements that we have. Could be quite disruptive to banking, and it could put quite a lot of operational onus on central banks. There are technologies for upgrading the current bank account payment system. I live in Silicon Valley. This is only one of the approaches that I've been learning about. This is a cloud-based solution in which there are two ledgers, one facing the public and one in the interbank arena, that would allow very fast and effective secure payments. This one happens to be one suggested by TokenX. It's based on an open application program interface ledger system. So this is technically feasible, but implementing upgrades is not an easy challenge. The Fed's proposed new payment system is slated to roll out in 2023, and it does take time to develop these. Let me finish by just giving a selection of policy options available to central banks and other regulators of the payment sphere. So the first and most obvious one is to regulate tech entrants. And David has said that he's open to being regulated. Of course, that's fairly easy to say because he doesn't have any choice. He's going to get regulated one way or the other. It's not clear yet in every jurisdiction exactly how those regulations are going to be put together in a rational way. So that's one thing that central banks and other regulators can do, is to develop a comprehensive map of where the regulations are coming from. Are they coming from securities regulators? Are they coming from the central bank or other payment regulators? Actually, that's a recommendation that's in the G7 report that was issued on Thursday, a very excellent report I would recommend particularly. A second option is to develop a general purpose central bank digital currency, and I think that's going to end up being case by case. So Sweden, for example, is considering the introduction of its own central bank digital currency. China is actively considering this. And as I said, it's a very major step, and to some extent it's a one-way step. It's going to be difficult to reverse once it's done, because it is so disruptive. And because it's going to be a one-stop shop for payments. An approach that was suggested by Governor Mark Carney of the Bank of England is to develop a general global central bank or official sector digital currency. The case for this is, in my view, much less obvious. First of all, this could be quite disruptive to medium and small countries in terms of their monetary policies. Robert Mundell wrote in 1961 about optimal sized currency zones, and certainly he didn't envision that the optimal currency zone would be global. The interaction effects between a global stablecoin and local monetary policy implementation could be extremely disruptive. As you can tell, my general sense at this point is that the most effective approach for central banks is to foster an upgrading of their current payment systems. And I think central banks do need to get involved. If left to commercial banks, there's an inherent conflict of interest. Commercial banks have an incentive to focus narrowly on their own stakeholders. This is a public goods arena, and individual commercial banks need not internalize all the benefits of a fast and efficient payment system, and in particular, an open payment system that includes a lot of competition among banks for deposit taking and a lot of competition for payment services. So I think central banks do need to get involved on the links of the payment system, although banks themselves can still be the portal to the general economy. So that's about what I wanted to say, Thurman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Agustin?
Thank you very much, Thurman. Thank you, David and Darrell. The advantage of being at the end is that you can sort of tailor your comments. The drawback is that your prepared remarks are useless. So, so let me do my best with these two excellent introductory remarks by my colleagues here at the panel. Let me start by saying that, needless to say, to embrace technology into the financial system is needed, is urgent, but also it's being done. Now, the key in all of these issues is that you have to embrace technology in the smarter possible way. I mean, a very famous phrase is break stuff and move on. Now, in financial systems, this thing that break things and then move on, the problem is that you leave a pile of mess there that somebody else has to clean. And usually that's the official sector. So I think the call for some orderly and collaborative process, I think it definitely is appropriate. I have to really and honestly and genuinely commend David for all what he has done. I mean, I think that there are very few examples of a single paper or single idea mobilize such an attention, so much devotion to explore what is good and what is questionable, how can be improved the scheme. I think that you hit the right spot. I think that you hit the right fibers. I think that what is very attractive is that you are appealing for very tangible improvements in welfare in society. And I think it's very difficult to reject that. So the idea is how can we get there in a more efficient way from a social point of view. Definitely, and I'm a very strong advocate for public-private partnerships. As a matter of fact, if we think about the financial system today, I think it's an extremely successful public and private partnership. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, I think right now in the margin, if it's very, I think, unfair to judge today's financial system just by the fact that you cannot do a remittance from Mexico to the U.S. Now, there are reasons for that, and I will address that later. But the degree of sophistication is there, and not even you know, the e-commerce that we see today and the penetration of internet in the different areas of society wouldn't be possible if we didn't have an extremely sophisticated and a strong performing financial system. Now, the issue with financial system, and I think that is something that characterizes it, is that you are really dealing with other people's money. And that obviously calls for a lot of regulation. And the second issue is also that for genuine reasons, we have imposed on the financial system AML-CFT. I have heard you said, and many other people say, how can it be that I can call my wife today in Basel at no cost through WhatsApp immediately, and why can I not transfer money? Well, if when you use WhatsApp, you would have to go through an AML-CFT process, you wouldn't be able to use the WhatsApp to do that communication. I mean, obviously, communication can also be used to promote terrorism and to do other harmful things. Now, imagine that you have to check that the other person that is receiving the call is a genuinely person that should be authorized into the network. Well, now that's what we are imposing on financial transactions. It has its objectives, and well, I'm not questioning them, and therefore we have to deal with that. That is a tremendously difficult issue to deal with, and for that technology, I think, needs to be used, and we need to be able to get to a point where this is not a hindrance to the development of payments, and we can do it in a very efficient way. Then there is the other reflection that we need to do, and which is where should we devote our efforts? I think that the proposition that has been put on the table, which is a global stable coin, which has this characteristic that it brings together the nature of money and the use of money in payments. Now, it's very curious that to be able to make efficient payments, which is the technology of making payments, I think really what matters, we need to design a whole new currency. And then on top of that, to design that currency, this construct has to import credibility from what we already have. So it seems to me that the most efficient way moving forward is to use all the genius of technology, all the force in technology, in really making payments effective and build on top of what we have. David said in his presentation, well, as today, at this particular moment, many cyber currencies are there. Well, guess what? That has been the history for the last 200 years. I will send you a book that Guillermo Ortiz, sitting here in front of us when he was governor, put together, which is the Central Bank of Mexico collection of bills and coins. It's probably the richest collection of that because in Mexico, especially in the revolution, we had the proliferation of money creation by hundreds of people. They are really nice, but they are useless. And you know, the truth is that through society, through time, we have gone through a full transformation of how to establish a fiat currency system based on central banks that can really take care of different phenomena that can arise when push comes to shove. Liquidity provision, I think it's something very important. Lending of last resort is very, very important. We have seen many attempts, many strong attempts to have a currency fully backed, and we have seen unendless efforts for that failing. So the thing is, the truth of the matter is, where should we put our efforts? My sense is that the people that are, and David, I mean, they have huge talent. I mean, I certainly think that we could come with the formula, and not only with David, but many other innovators around, where we can optimize the use of technology with what we have, with what we have proven that it works, and that provides stability. So for me, I think that that probably should be the main policy objective. With respect to the list of solutions that Darrell put forward, I fully subscribe all of them. I mean, I think what will decide where we will move into is basically what is the most efficient way to get there. There is no question in the central banking community that this is an area where we have to move. As a matter of fact, each central bank individually are putting a lot of effort into this. And collectively, we're also doing it so. In the BIS, we have now something called the BIS Innovation Hub, where we are bringing together the different central banks precisely to think on these type of issues. We have a center in Zurich, Basel. We have one in Singapore. We have one in Hong Kong. We're planning to open one or two more in Europe. We're going to open one in the Americas. And the idea is precisely for central banks to really have a deep dive into technology, redouble its efforts in this direction, liaise with the private sector, and try to get a best possible solution. I think if there is enough collaboration, enough engagement early on, I think that we can save a lot of resources, both from the private sector point of view, because, you know, and something when I was discussing or thinking about these issues into Innovation Hub, I certainly consulted many people, and a very smart person that I think is sitting in this audience told me one of the key things you have to be able to do is to identify those projects that are going into the dead end and identify them on time and close them. I think that's one of the most hard things to do in this type of thing, but also is what happens the most. I mean, in innovation, and you know probably this better than I do, there are hundreds, thousands of attempts and very few progress. To maximize that, I think that early engagement between authorities and the private sector, the academicians, I think is desirable. That's something that we're trying to do. Certainly, Tarman and his team has been very supportive of all these efforts. The idea is to create a win-win and build up on solid bases that we have. For me, one of the solid bases that we have is all the construct about central banking. I think the construct of central banking is what really has provided trust to the financial system, and I think that's something that we have to preserve. Of course, we have to provide the platform for innovation to build up on top of that, and in that way serve society better. Central banks cannot do the last mile, not even the last 2 or 3 miles. That's something that others have to do, and there is plenty of space for innovation. And of course, we need to go into the direction of cross-border payments. So that's my position. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That was very useful, Agustin. So I now open it to the floor, and I would encourage our speakers to respond to each other as well. You want to do so immediately, David? Yeah.
I would love to, thank you. Well, I wanted to address 2 things. One is, there is truly that narrative that the reason there's such a high cost for moving money around the world are actually the AML, CFT, and KYC efforts that need to be performed, and as a result, there's intrinsic cost coming from that gets passed on to consumers. And I agree that there is some cost. There is definitely some cost. But I do think that the main cost that is currently getting in the way of efficient, fast, real-time transfers is actually the fact that there are so many intermediaries and that the infrastructure is antiquated in many places, despite all of the very good regional efforts that we've seen, notably in Europe and Singapore, now projects even here in the US. Those are all domestic regional payments networks. There are no really big advances in having a global infrastructure to move money around the world. So that's one point that I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is really relating to the approach. And I think that while I can't speak for all the members of the Libra Association now, I can share my view, which is that I think we're all in this because we have a lot of passion and drive to resolve these very issues for a large number of people, and we're not dogmatic about the approach at all. The white paper that we put out is one of many ways that this can be done, and we're definitely, as I think we've demonstrated, very open to a lot of feedback and having constructive conversations on alternative ways to address the very problem. What we're really focused on is really building the infrastructure. Now, whether it is the way we've described or other ways, again, very open to all of the input along the way.
Yes, please. Well, Darrell and then Agustin.
Yeah. So you've been hearing a lot about cross-border. I wouldn't, and I agree with the comments that have been made about the need to take out some of the costs and complicated infrastructure involved in cross-border. But I wouldn't want the conversation to get hijacked into one that's focusing mainly on cross-border. In my view, the situation domestically, particularly in certain currency zones like the United States, is a much more important one for central banks to face. The majority of payments are made domestically. In my view, the use case for Libra is going to be mom in San Francisco sends her daughter in Miami a birthday gift when she gets onto her Facebook page first thing in the morning on her daughter's birthday. It's going to be someone going into Starbucks and buying a cup of coffee, or deciding that it's simpler to, as in China with WeChat Pay and Alipay, to make their payments off their mobile apps. These Chinese solutions are extremely effective. They have displaced an enormous amount of bank-based payment systems, and they're entirely a domestic arrangement in China, with very rare exceptions. So before central banks get into a very long, complicated decision about global solutions and coordinating over either a global currency or get overly focused on cross-border payment, which I think the private sector can take care of, I think each central bank should focus on its home turf, and especially in places like the United States, provide a better solution to its own citizens.
Agustin?
Yeah, just, I mean, certainly what Darrell is saying is absolutely true, and I think there are tremendous efforts there. I think there are already very good results, and I think there is a lot of collaboration. Technology has been identified, and we will be able to deploy this in many, many more countries relatively soon. And I also agree with you that certainly, I mean, basically what we have seen, and this is something we have seen in technology in different aspects, is that emerging markets have leapfrogged advanced economies just because they have been using technology. I mean, a clear case is China, for example. And certainly I think that advanced economies need to move forward. So that's one thing. The other is, I insist on, I certainly agree with you that the AMLC is just one problem and that there are many margins in which things can be improved. And I think one of the issues that probably we need to work more is to coordinate more among central bankers. And I think, yes, technology now helped us to reduce many intermediaries, for example, through tokenization. And I think we should embrace that. One important problem is that we don't have a world central bank. And that is something that we have to deal with. And it's not that I'm proposing to create a world central bank. But yes, that requires a lot of coordination. And I'm hopeful that we will get there. And having been governor of Banco de Mexico, one day I will need to have a drink with you to tell you the problems with AML-CFT, especially when you want to pay from Mexico to the U.S. and from the U.S. to Mexico. I mean, it's something that you just cannot imagine how complicated it is.
Well, there's a useful tension in our discussion between two approaches. One approach is build on what we have and retain the most essential values in what we have, especially credibility, and find more effective and efficient solutions to meet our needs. Another approach is to allow for some disruption, experimentation and disruption, but find ways of then making the disruptions mainstream. And I think both are valid approaches, and an early advocate of the latter approach was a very innovative entity called the Rolling Stones, about 60 years ago. And what they said was, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. Next question. First, Axel in front, Piyush at the back. 3 questions first. Axel first, yeah.
I think an issue we have to establish whether there is a market failure here or whether it is just competing different systems in the private sector, and others are happy to add to that. For example, we in the banking system are operating systems that, if they're based on sort of the same types of technology, are 100% backed by central bank money. Finality of payment and all of these things is assured, and everyone's welcome to the competition, but I don't really see the market failure of why we should need to go away from existing systems rather than have a competition among them, but under the same rules. And I think this was what Darrell was referring to. The rules and the regulatory part, once you get there, you will discover, as Agustin was indicating, this is heavily regulated industry, and it's even more heavily regulated if it works cross-border. And so I think we have to take away some illusions that we can sort of depart from the current degree of complexity, which is not there by coincidence. It is there by design. And it's very hard to strip that all away and let's start with a white piece of paper, and we could get to a better solution than the one we've arrived to over centuries of evolution of central banking and private banking collaboration. Thank you.
Please.
Piyush Gupta from DBS. So to Darrell's point, I think the problem of domestic payments is being solved and solved rapidly. So real-time domestic payments using mobile phone numbers or personal identifications is happening in India, in China, in Singapore, in Thailand. And in the next 2 years, almost every country will make that a reality. Technology makes it very easy to do. And as you said, Agustin, it's true that some of the developed markets haven't got there yet. Everybody will get there in 2 years. So the real problem is actually cross-border payments. And there is a market failure. There is a high cost of cross-border payments. But interestingly, if you really pass it out, more and more banks today are doing cross-border payments with no fee. The cost of cross-border payments comes from fee, from float, but most of all from currency conversion. And today you're already getting to a world where people aren't charging fees. Float is, whether you go stable coin or you go to the bank, float doesn't change. So really the cost and what you're trying to solve for is currency conversion. The cost of currency conversion is very high. Any solution you want to look for, therefore, is really solving for one problem. How do you get away from multiple currencies to a single medium of exchange? Which is why the need for a global stable coin or a unit of account which people can deal with across borders without having to convert every time you want to make a transfer. So in that context, it's not, I understand all the issues between stable coin and monetary policy, but that is not clear to me why the idea that Mark Carney suggested, or Governor Zhou from China suggested even 2 weeks ago, the idea of an official global stable coin, like an ESDR, IMF backed, why that should not be something we explore harder. It takes it and puts it squarely within the ambit of the public sector, but creates a single unit of account which can trade freely across the world. And you could put controls around it, around X amount of value or X amount of thing if you think there's too much volatility at a monetary policy level. Why is that such a bad idea?
So I have two, I'm not sure this is on.
Please, yeah.
Yeah, I have two concerns. One is let's consider a medium to smallish economy. Let's take Uruguay, for example. If I was the governor of the Central Bank of Uruguay, I would be quite concerned that I would be able to convince my citizens to keep their deposits in the local currency and to make their payments in the local currency. If not, then I lose my ability to implement monetary policy that's appropriate to that particular macroeconomic situation. The other concern is the coordination costs are relatively high compared to the gain in the use case. Coordination costs meaning if this is going to be a popular international currency, then monetary policy needs to be coordinated for it. And it's already difficult enough. The gain case is when you move, supposedly when you move money from currency A to currency B, that you're going to do it faster if you stop on the way to a global currency and making two transactions rather than one. So is it clear that with technology you can't improve on the current bilateral exchange rate system? I think technology can handle this problem rather than developing a new global currency.
Carlos Torres.
Yeah, I'm Carlos Torres. I'm the chairman of BBVA. I had a question for David, linking a bit of everything we have heard. I wanted to ask whether the emphasis of Libra is mostly on the payments, as seems to be the case according to the discussion today, so the payment use case, and also as Governor Carstens was pointing to, or rather that together with the store of value element of the currency. And if it is the first, the emphasis on the payment, whether then Libra is no more than just an instrumental token for that rail, that would not even have a consumer significance or even be a consumer brand.
That's an excellent question, actually. And of the things that I think we should have done a better job at is that we should have described this for what it is, which is its payments infrastructure, and the Libra token is a medium of exchange in between. So, you know, what I expect the use case to be is one where people get in and out of the Libra currency quite quickly to settle a payment on these new rails, but probably unlikely to use it to, buy a coffee at Starbucks, given that all prices are denominated in, of course, local currency. So the current thinking, and the thinking has always been that Libra can be a stable digital asset that can be used to transact between two currency pairs, or a transaction that basically relies on these new rails. So the approach could be different, and it could be that you create a series of stable coins instead of creating this synthetic assets. So basically, just create dollar, euro, Japanese yen, Singapore dollar, etc., and just let people choose and use it. I think that would probably have a different type of use case as well, but that's also another alternative approach.
Next question. The gentleman at the back. Oh, sorry, Roger first. You had your hand up first. And then so gentleman in front, and then the gentleman at the back, and the lady in front.
Thanks. So I think, Darrell, you put your finger on the challenge, but also the beauty of Libra. So you've hypothesized a small open economy, or a small economy with a central bank that is really focused and is doing the right thing. We also see it, there are millions of people who are living in economies where central banks are allowing inflation to get out of hand. So one might argue that the benefit of a stable coin backed by a basket of currencies is it forces central banks to be much more disciplined in avoiding hyperinflation, and thereby undercutting financial stability for millions of people. And in that sense, I think the competition is not between Libra as a payment system in the United States versus the US dollar. All of us in the US are not going to adopt a basket of currencies and deal with that kind of risk for local transactions. But for folks who live in places where central banks aren't as responsible as they are represented in this room, it might be that Libra is a great way to avoid the cost of irresponsible central banking. We need to at least put that on the table.
I'm going to take the questions together. So Roger's first question is an important one. There was a gentleman at the back there.
Thank you very much. Alexander Svoboda. I think to some extent we need to focus on what problems are we focusing on. And one single solution for all of them isn't going to do. Now, we talked about inclusion, okay? This morning we heard examples of how you foster inclusion in Kenya, for instance, and the means to do that. And we don't need a Libra or a stable coin to do that. This is work in progress, and these are sort of national problems. Second sort of concern was international payments, and in particular the foreign exchange market. Now, this does work at a wholesale level among major currencies. So here I think the question is, can technology, competition, new structures help us carry that on more efficiently to the retail level? And that's a different type of problem. Incidentally, I live in Switzerland, and I make payments sometimes in France, to France, for small amounts through the bank. Now, I found out that I was charged extremely highly if I wanted to do that transfer, asking my bank to do it. But if I do the electronic banking, I can transfer small sums of money to France from Swiss francs to euro, from debiting my Swiss franc account with value next day. So that problem is also susceptible to things. Finally, I would say about the United States, for those of us who occasionally come here, have worked here, this is the most primitive payment system of any of the industrialized countries I know. Oh, and finally, the solution to the small country and so on, how about dollarization? That has been the solution and the disciplining factor, dollarization, euroization, and so on. You're not going to solve that particular problem by having some other type of currency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sobara. The lady in front, and then Larry in front.
Thank you very much. Constance Hunter from KPMG. So the gentleman in the back actually asked most of the question that I was intending to ask, which is always getting to the question of what problem does it solve? I had the privilege of interviewing Hikmet Ersat, who's the CEO of Western Union. And of course, Western Union has 50% of the global remittances market and deals with the issues of the current rails and cross-border transactions and currency. And when I asked him, why aren't you going to a more Libra-like solution? Why aren't you going to a coin solution? He basically said it wouldn't solve our two biggest problems, which of course are currency and AML. And the things that solve those problems for us are the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and technology that we already deploy. And then I would just comment that in the US, if I wanted to send money to someone as a birthday gift, I already have Apple Pay and Venmo in addition to ACH. And I agree our rails are a little antiquated compared to the rest of the world, but those solutions are already out there. So I think it's very important to very rigorously ask this question, what problem are you trying to solve?
Good point. Larry.
This is sort of a big picture question, and I've always kind of wondered about it, and this seems like a good chance to inform myself. Payments is a really important industry with a lot of important aspects. So's the distribution of food, so's transmitting electricity. There are a lot of really important industries. Central bank governors are usually regarded as the second most important person in their countries. G30 is a pretty high-level group. There are a lot of pretty high-level groups. Electricity distribution roughly never gets on the front page of the New York Times. Innovating about the payments technology, cryptocurrency gets